President-elect Donald Trump's lawyers are asking a judge to throw out his hush money criminal conviction. Lawyers argue the case would present unconstitutional disruptions to the institution of the presidency. They also cited President Joe Biden's recent pardon of his son Hunter Biden. Prosecutors say they will fight any efforts to dismiss the case, but have indicated openness to delaying sentencing until after Trump's second term ends in 2029.
Okay, so I need everyone to pay very close attention right now, because what's happening in a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. could change everything about how we understand presidential power in America. A federal judge has just revived a criminal contempt inquiry against Trump administration officials, and he's not messing around this time. Judge James Boasberg is preparing to drag senior officials into his courtroom and demand they testify under oath about whether they deliberately ignored his court orders on deportation flights. We're talking about potential sanctions here. We're talking about possible criminal referrals to federal prosecutors. We're talking about the very real possibility that people currently serving in this administration could face serious legal consequences for defying a federal judge. And all of this is happening while Trump pushes the most aggressive immigration crackdown in modern American history. The collision between the courts and the White House is reaching a breaking point. And the next few weeks could determine whether there's any limit to what this administration can get away with when they decide to ignore the judiciary. Let me tell you exactly what's going on here, because the mainstream media has been covering this in bits and pieces without connecting the dots to show you the full picture of this confrontation between branches of government. Back in the spring, Judge Boasberg issued an order limiting the rapid deportation of suspected Venezuelan gang members under something called the Alien Enemies Act. This is an old wartime law that the administration has been using in creative ways to fast-track removals without the normal legal protections that people are entitled to under our Constitution. The judge said, "Slow down, give these people a chance to challenge their deportation before you put them on planes and fly them out of the country to places where they might face danger." That's basic due process. That's what the Constitution requires and has required since the founding of this nation. But according to evidence presented in court, the administration kept sending deportation flights anyway. They allegedly ignored or worked around the judge's order while continuing to remove people from the country as if no order existed at all and no judge had ever ruled on the matter. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Thanks for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Christina Evans. We do have some breaking news that we want to get to at this moment, and it comes to us from our nation's capital. I want to put up this live vantage point that we have there of the White House. This is big news, as a U.S. federal judge ruled today that the Pentagon's deployment of the National Guard in Washington, D.C. is illegal. It was Judge Gia Cobb who ruled today that the National Guard's deployment was illegal, but stayed the effect of her order until December 11th. This will give the Trump administration time to ultimately appeal this, during which the National Guard will remain in D.C. And so what we do know is that we've heard from a few others. We have D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwab releasing this following statement, saying, quote, "From the beginning, we made it clear that the U.S. military should not be policing American citizens on American soil. Normalizing the use of military troops for domestic law enforcement sets a dangerous precedent."
Now the judge found probable cause that his order was violated, and he's done waiting for voluntary compliance from the administration. On November 19, 2025, he announced he would proceed as planned with a criminal contempt inquiry after an appeals court removed the obstacles that had been blocking him for months. He wants officials in his courtroom answering questions. He wants sworn testimony under oath where lying means prison time for perjury. He wants documents showing who authorized which flights and when they authorized them. And if he determines that officials knowingly violated his order, we could see sanctions imposed. We could see criminal referrals sent to prosecutors. We could see Trump's own people facing real legal consequences for ignoring a federal judge while they were supposed to be serving the public interest. Come on, are you kidding me with this? This is the administration that never stops talking about law and order. This is the administration that constantly lectures everyone else about respecting the rules and following the law. And now a federal judge is saying they probably broke the law by ignoring his court order, and he's preparing to hold them accountable for it in ways that could end careers and potentially lead to criminal charges. The hypocrisy here is absolutely staggering when you actually stop and think about what's happening right now in our country. And here's what makes this even more significant and why everyone needs to be paying attention to this story right now. This contempt fight isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening at the exact moment Trump is ramping up the most aggressive immigration agenda we've ever seen from any president in American history. Just in the past few weeks, the administration halted all asylum decisions nationwide after National Guard members were shot in Washington. Every single pending asylum case in the entire country, frozen indefinitely with no timeline for when they might resume. Thousands of people who had nothing to do with that shooting are now in limbo because Trump decided to use a tragedy as an excuse to shut down the entire asylum system that he's wanted to dismantle since day one. And then Trump announced he wants to permanently pause migration from what he called third world countries, not temporarily while they figure out new procedures, permanently, forever. He's also vowing to expel millions of people who were admitted under Biden, essentially promising mass deportations on a scale we've never seen before in the history of this nation. So you've got an administration that's being investigated for potentially violating court orders on deportations, and their response is to announce even more aggressive deportation plans while that investigation proceeds. That's like being investigated for speeding and announcing you're going to drive even faster from now on. The defiance here is breathtaking in its boldness. They're daring the courts to stop them while openly planning to push even further than they already have. Democrats and immigrant rights advocates are watching all of this very closely and preparing their response. Some are openly talking about using any finding of contempt or law breaking to fuel new calls for investigations on Capitol Hill. There's chatter about impeachment bubbling up in the Democratic base again. The anger is real and it's growing by the day as this confrontation escalates. This isn't just a legal fight anymore. This is a political crisis that's testing whether American institutions can actually hold a sitting administration accountable when they push past legal limits. Let's get into all the details of what's happening. All right, so let's really dig into what's happening here because this situation is more complicated than most people realize. And understanding the full picture is crucial if you want to know where this is heading in the coming weeks and months. To understand this contempt fight, you need to understand three connected things that all come together to create this crisis. First, what happened with the deportation flights that got the administration in trouble with Judge Boasberg in the first place? Second, what criminal contempt actually means and why the consequences could be so serious for officials involved. And third, how this connects to Trump's broader immigration agenda and why it matters right now at this particular moment. Let's take these one at a time and really break them down so everyone understands what's at stake. So, what happened with these deportation flights that has a federal judge ready to potentially hold administration officials in contempt of court? Earlier this year, Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act to fast-track deportations of suspected Venezuelan gang members without the normal legal protections that are supposed to apply. This is an old law from 1798 that was designed for wartime situations, giving presidents expanded powers to detain and deport citizens of enemy nations during actual armed conflicts between countries. The administration made the argument that they could use this wartime law against members of a Venezuelan gang called Tren de Aragua, basically treating gang membership as something equivalent to enemy combatant status that triggers these extraordinary powers. It was a creative legal theory to say the least, and many legal experts were skeptical from the start about whether this use of the law would survive court challenges. Civil rights groups immediately challenged this in court, arguing that the administration was stretching this old law way beyond anything it was ever meant to cover or intended to address by the people who wrote it. They said innocent people were getting swept up in this dragnet and deported without any real chance to prove they weren't actually gang members at all. Some of these people were just regular Venezuelan migrants who got caught up in the crackdown because of their nationality, not because of anything they actually did wrong or any gang affiliation they actually had. They deserved a chance to go before a judge and make their case before being shipped off to another country where they might face serious danger. That's what due process means under our system of law. That's what American law requires and has required for centuries since the Constitution was written. So Judge Boasberg stepped in and issued a temporary restraining order to pause these deportations until the legal questions could be sorted out. He told the administration to slow down on these removals. He said they couldn't just put people on planes and fly them out of the country before they had a chance to challenge their removal in court and present evidence in their defense. It was a clear and direct order that shouldn't have been hard to understand or follow for anyone who respects the rule of law. But here's where things went sideways and where the contempt fight comes from. According to evidence presented in court, the administration kept sending deportation flights even after the judge's order was in place and was supposed to be followed by everyone in the executive branch. They either ignored the order completely or found technical loopholes to work around it while pretending to comply with what the judge had ruled. Either way, the result was the same. People were being removed from the country in what the judge concluded was likely a direct violation of his ruling. He found probable cause that the government had violated his temporary restraining order. That's a federal judge looking at the actual evidence and concluding that the executive branch probably broke the law by ignoring what he told them to do. Can you believe this is actually happening in America right now? The administration that never stops talking about law and order and respecting the rules, that same administration is now facing a judge who says they violated a court order. The same people who lecture everyone else about following the law apparently decided the law doesn't apply to them when it gets in the way of what they want to do on immigration. The hypocrisy would be funny if the consequences weren't so serious for real people whose lives are being affected by these decisions. Now let's talk about what criminal contempt actually means, because this is where the stakes get really high for officials involved and where this story gets even more significant for the future of our government. When a judge finds someone in criminal contempt of court, it means they've determined that person willfully and knowingly disobeyed a court order. This is different from civil contempt, which is usually about pressuring someone to comply with ongoing orders through fines or other means that can be lifted once they comply. Criminal contempt is specifically about punishment for violations that already happened in the past. It's the judge saying, "You broke the rules, and now you're going to face consequences for what you did regardless of what you do going forward." Those consequences can include significant fines that could be substantial amounts of money. They can include referrals for criminal prosecution by federal prosecutors who could bring charges. And in serious cases, they can include actual jail time for the officials involved who violated the court's orders. If Judge Boasberg determines that senior Trump officials knowingly authorized deportation flights that violated his order, he has the power to refer those specific individuals for criminal prosecution. That means people currently serving in this administration could potentially face criminal charges because they decided to ignore a federal judge. This isn't hypothetical speculation anymore about what might happen someday. The inquiry is active right now. Hearings could begin very soon, and the judge seems determined to get answers about exactly who made which decisions and when they made them. And here's what makes this situation even more explosive and why it matters beyond just this one case. While this contempt inquiry hangs over the administration like a storm cloud, they've responded not by pulling back, but by pushing even harder on immigration enforcement in ways that seem designed to provoke further confrontation with the courts. The asylum shutdown that happened after the National Guard shooting is a perfect example of this aggressive approach. The shooting was a tragedy that everyone agrees was terrible and shouldn't have happened. National Guard members were hurt while serving their country at the border, but the administration's response was to freeze all asylum decisions across the entire country, punishing thousands of people who had nothing to do with the incident and whose cases have been pending for years while they waited patiently in line. This is collective punishment on a massive scale, and everyone can see what's really happening here. The people waiting for asylum decisions didn't shoot anyone. They're just families and individuals who followed the legal process to request protection in the United States because they faced danger in their home countries. Now their lives are frozen indefinitely because the administration seized on a tragedy to justify shutting down a system they never liked in the first place and have been trying to dismantle since they took office. Critics are saying this was the plan all along. They were just waiting for an excuse to do what they wanted to do anyway, and now they have one. And then there's Trump's announcement that he wants to permanently pause migration from what he called third world countries. Permanently. Not temporarily while they implement new vetting procedures or figure out better systems. Permanently. Forever. No more immigration from these countries ever again if he gets his way. He's also vowing to expel millions of people who were admitted under Biden, essentially promising mass deportations on a scale that would dwarf anything we've seen before in American history. Immigration analysts estimate that fully implementing what Trump is describing would require removing somewhere between 10 and 15 million people from the country. The logistics alone are almost impossible to imagine when you think about what that would actually require. The legal challenges would be endless and would tie up the courts for years, and the human cost would be absolutely staggering in ways most people haven't fully processed yet. So you've got this pattern emerging that critics say shows an administration determined to push immigration enforcement as far as possible, regardless of what courts say or what the law requires. Deportation flights that allegedly violated court orders, an asylum shutdown using a tragedy as justification for what they wanted to do anyway, announcements of even more aggressive plans while the contempt inquiry proceeds against their officials. The message seems clear. They're going to do what they want and dare the courts to stop them. And so far, they seem to believe the courts can't actually do anything meaningful to hold them accountable. Alright, so let's break this down into what really matters and what you need to understand about where this situation is heading in the coming weeks and months. Point number 1. This contempt inquiry represents the most serious direct challenge to Trump administration officials we've seen since he took office for his second term. This isn't like political attacks or media criticism that can be dismissed or ignored without consequence. This is a federal judge with actual power to impose real consequences on specific individuals who work for the administration. Judge Boasberg found probable cause that his order was violated by government officials. He's demanding sworn testimony from those officials under oath where lying is a crime. And if he formally finds contempt, he can refer people for criminal prosecution that could end their careers and potentially their freedom. Think about what that means for a second. People currently serving in this administration, people who show up to work at federal buildings every day thinking they're untouchable, could face criminal charges because they decided to ignore a judge. This isn't about policy disagreements or political fights between parties. This is about whether the executive branch has to follow court orders or whether they can just do whatever they want, whenever they want, without consequences. The answer to that question has enormous implications for how American government works going forward for generations. Point number 2, the administration's response to this legal pressure tells you everything you need to know about how they view institutional constraints on their power. Instead of pulling back while under investigation for potentially violating court orders, they've pushed harder and faster. The asylum shutdown, the migration freeze announcement, the promises of mass deportations on an unprecedented scale. Everything about their response suggests they don't think they need to worry about what courts say or what judges rule. They're either confident they can win any legal fight that comes their way, or confident they can simply ignore any ruling they don't like without facing real consequences. This pattern of defiance isn't new for Trump or the people around him. Throughout his political career, he's treated legal constraints as obstacles to work around rather than rules to follow in good faith. But what's different now is that he's the sitting president with the full power of the executive branch behind him. When he ignores a court order, it's not just one person breaking rules. It's the federal government itself deciding that judicial rulings are optional suggestions rather than binding law. That's a constitutional crisis by any reasonable definition of the term. Point number 3. Democrats and Trump critics are watching this contempt fight as potential ammunition for broader accountability efforts, including possible impeachment talk on Capitol Hill. Now, to be clear, there's no indication that impeachment papers have been formally filed at this point in time. The votes aren't there in Congress, and Democratic leadership isn't pushing for it right now as an immediate priority. But that doesn't mean the conversation isn't happening behind closed doors and increasingly in public. Activists in the Democratic base are openly calling for more aggressive action against the administration. Some lawmakers are suggesting that any finding of contempt or lawbreaking should trigger congressional investigations with subpoena power. The anger is real, and this contempt inquiry is giving it fuel. Point number 4. Whatever happens with this specific inquiry, the broader confrontation between Trump's immigration agenda and the courts is only going to intensify in the coming months as more legal challenges work their way through the system. The administration has made clear they intend to pursue the most aggressive immigration enforcement in modern history, regardless of what obstacles they face. Courts are pushing back against the most extreme measures, and neither side shows any sign of backing down from this confrontation. So, where does this leave us as we watch this situation develop day by day? We're at an inflection point in American politics where the fundamental question is whether institutional constraints still apply to the executive branch when they decide to ignore them. A federal judge says the administration probably violated his order. The administration responds by announcing even more aggressive plans. The judge moves toward contempt proceedings. The administration keeps pushing forward anyway. Something has to give because both sides cannot win this confrontation. Either the courts will successfully hold officials accountable, establishing that there are real consequences for defying judges, or the administration will demonstrate that court orders can be ignored without meaningful punishment when you have enough political power behind you. The precedent set here will last far beyond this administration and this specific case. If Trump officials face no real consequences for allegedly violating court orders, it tells every future president that judicial constraints are just suggestions that can be ignored when convenient. That's a fundamental change in how American government works. The next few weeks are critical for the future of our system of checks and balances. Boasberg's hearings could begin soon. Officials could be called to testify under oath about who authorized deportation flights that may have violated court orders. We could see criminal referrals that put real legal jeopardy on people currently serving in the government, Or we could see the administration find ways to delay and obstruct until the political moment passes and everyone moves on to the next crisis. What we're watching is a stress test of American institutions in real time, with stakes that will shape politics for years to come. Can courts actually enforce their orders when the executive branch decides to ignore them? Does the rule of law apply to everyone equally, or only to people without power and political connections? Is there any limit to how far an administration can push when they're determined to pursue their agenda regardless of legal constraints? We're going to find out the answers to those questions, and whatever happens in Judge Boasberg's courtroom over the next few weeks is going to matter for a very long time. The administration wanted to test how far they could push. They found a judge willing to push back. Now we see who blinks first. Keep watching this one closely. It's about to get very interesting. I'll see you in the next one.